Good evening. My name is Dr. Madhumita Premkumar. I'm Associate Professor of Hepatology at PGIMR Chandigarh. At the outset, I thank the organizers for inviting me to take the lecture. The topic given to me is, are PCOS women more prone to develop non-alcoholic steatohepatitis and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And the question is looking at the continuum of liver disease in such patients. So the outline would be to discuss the pathogenesis of the metabolic defect, which is common to both NAFLD, and also to stratify the risk of NAFLD in PCOS and vice versa, discuss the currently available clinical and laboratory scores, and also assess who is at higher risk of progression to advanced disease. So let us take a look at three case scenarios. The first is a 16-year-old adolescent with PCOS, normal BMI, ultrasound shows grade 1 fatty liver. The ALT is normal here, it's 18 international units per liter. Please remember that the cutoffs for ALT have been reduced to 19 in women, which means the 35 and 40 upper limit of normal and laboratory values may actually be high. The patient also has elevated serum insulin levels, and the patient is concerned about acne, but we are more worried about liver disease here. So this is the first case. The second case is a 42-year-old woman with past history of PCOS who has received infertility treatments. Her BMI is 26 kg per meter square. She is already on statins for dyslipidemia. She is hypertensive, diabetic, HbA1c is elevated. Ultrasound shows grade 2 fatty liver. The ALT is elevated. So this is a case of an overweight woman with diabetes and hypertension who also has non-alcoholic steatohepatitis as evidenced by raised ALT, which is a surrogate. And the third case is a 50-year-old woman who is having history of PCOS and now has symptomatic gallstone disease. She is obese, BMI of 29, diabetic, hypertensive again. Statins are given to many patients these days. And the ultrasound is showing a gallbladder polyp, which could be a precancerous lesion. Her ALT is 110. So the pre-surgical assessment is the reason why she is being referred, but we really need to assess whether the patient might be having underlying cirrhosis. Continuum of liver disease from a normal liver, if there's accumulation of fat or steatosis in the liver more than 5%, but there's not much inflammation in the liver histology. So this is a case of plain steatosis or NAFL, non-alcoholic fatty liver. NAFLD or steatohepatitis, which has significant inflammation or significant hepatocyte ballooning in liver histology, and some of them over time will progress to develop a nodular liver with advanced fibrotic bands. So this is a case of cirrhosis. The patient might decompensate later in the form of hepatic encephalopathy, ascites, or variceal bleeding. And of course, a good number of these patients are now progressing to hepatocellular carcinoma. The prevalence is 9 to 35% in most communities in India, in Chandigarh, and I suspect in other urban areas. The presence of NAFLD is as high as 50% in urban populations. In this study, from South Asia, an association was found between the presence of NAFLD in women who have PCOS. So in 101 patients who were aged mean age of 36 years, the prevalence of NAFLD was 40%, and significant fibrosis was as high as 6.9%. Elevated ALT was observed in 40% of patients with NAFLD and 11.5% of patients without NAFLD. So the elevated ALT is a good marker that this patient has NAFLD. The independent predictors of NAFLD were a higher body mass index and hyperandrogenism with an adjusted odds ratio of 5.32, and an elevated ALT predicted the presence of NAFLD in PCOS women with an odds ratio of 3.54. To assess the association between NAFLD and PCOS, this study examined the liver biopsies of 102 patients who had biopsy-proven NAFLD, and of these 102, 36% had PCOS, and the median age was 35 years. There was, of course, a Asian or Hispanic and white multi-ethnic population, but what is interesting is that NASH, that is steatohepatitis, is present more commonly in patients with PCOS as compared to NAFLD without PCOS, and a higher proportion of them also had evidence of severe hepatocyte ballooning and also presence of any fibrosis or advanced fibrosis, which means that the metabolic effect adds up in these cases and leads to worsened histological status. When adjusted for age and BMI, PCOS is independently associated with severe hepatocyte ballooning and advanced fibrosis. So the real question is, why are PCOS women at increased risk of NAFLD? And the answer comes in, how is energy metabolism regulated in the human body? So when we know from our physiology that the intake and the expenditure actually determines how much net calorie deficit or increase there is, and that will actually result in how much fat is going to be formed and fatty tissue be deposited in the human body, and that's how weight is regulated. So the neurohormones that control our appetite and food intake would be leptin, which is released from the adipose tissue, insulin from the pancreas, ghrelin from the stomach cells. So the second set of neurohormones we need to be aware of are the incretins, that is glucagon-like peptide, and this is released from the L cell of the ileum and also from the K cell from the jejunum, and these are going to affect how the body responds to a meal. So energy metabolism is very closely regulated. We know, even though our diet changes day to day, some people will become obese over time if there is a net energy intake, and others remain lean. So the key signals to the CNS, such as leptin, will actually determine what is the set point at which the patient's body weight would be kept. So the body fat and body weight is subject to this metabolic checkpoint thanks to all of these hormones. A simplified way of looking at this is to look at the adipose bathtub analogy. In a healthy individual, depending on the energy intake controlled by this intake valve, which is our mouth, the adipose storage capacity and the stored triglyceride, and thereafter the energy expenditure, which is the efflux from whatever is our stored energy level, determines the total degree of adiposity, right? In patients who are insulin resistant, such as PCOS, and those who might be obese, if there is an increased energy intake, well, the adipose storage capacity is exceeded. Also, if there is decreased energy expenditure, so there is an overflow from the bathtub, but the capacity of storage in adipose tissue is limited. In non-obese, insulin-resistant or the lean variety of NAFLD, there is very limited adipose storage capacity in that compartment. So the amount or the metabolic set point at which this overflow occurs is set at a much lower level. But remember, the metabolic defect and the insulin resistance is equivalent. In fact, some of these patients might be at higher risk of other metabolic syndrome risk factors such as CAD and stroke, because tending to look at their level of body weight, we tend to underestimate their risk of developing complications of the metabolic syndrome. So lean NAFLD is having the same metabolic risk as non-lean NAFLD. So how does leptin actually work? Well, from the adipose tissue to determine whether there will be weight loss with shrinkage of the adipocytes or weight gain with increased storage of fat in the adipocytes. If there is weight gain, then leptin increases, and this will decrease the food intake and result in an increased energy expenditure. So this is how the metabolic set point will be set. And in case of weight loss, like in starvation, there will be reduction in leptin. This triggers an increased hunger reflex and will also trigger a body's tendency to decrease energy expenditure. So this is how the adipose set point works. But what happens when there is a problem with the energy metabolism? Well, leptin is blocked from performing this good action on the brain by insulin. So the blockage by hyperinsulinemia in our patients with PCOS actually triggers the other metabolic effect, and even though leptin is increased, the patient continues to have an increased hunger. There is still a tendency for decreased energy expenditure because the brain is tricked into believing that they are there in the weight loss stage. Even though the levels of leptin are high, they fail to act on the CNS and the patient tends to gain weight. And this is a very simplified, oversimplified analogy to understand the metabolic defect. We are all aware what the incretin effect is. The incretin effect is that if the patient is giving intravenous versus intrajejunal glucose, the blood glucose tends to be slightly higher in the intravenous subgroup and it's slightly lower in the intrajejunal subgroup. But when we look at the plasma insulin levels, when we give intravenous glucose, the plasma insulin rises slightly but not much. Whereas if we look at the curve for the intrajejunal glucose, the peptides from the gut, they stimulate the release of insulin from the pancreas, and this delta in the insulin shown in this classic 1964 study is the incretin effect. So PCOS women and metabolic syndrome and NAFLD are the same disease which go hand in hand due to the resetting of the neurohormones and the alterations in leptin, ghrelin and the incretins. And this leads to a lifetime of issues. It starts with case A, with the patient first coming as a troubled adolescent with hirsutism and acne. Then there could be irregular menstrual cycles. The patient tends to get overweight or obese in the mid-20s. There could be issues, the metabolic syndrome is then setting in. There could be requirement of OCPs to regulate cycle. They may tend to become obese if this is all untreated till then. At each stage, we had opportunities to aid the patient. We could improve peripheral insulin sensitivity, work and see how the pancreas utilize the incretin effect. At the age of 30, they might require fertility assistance, and definitely in the 40s. And then, of course, there are all these risks associated with pregnancies, and we tend to ignore, if we don't look holistically at the patient, the risk for diabetes, cardiovascular disease, which leads to mortality. The risk in these patients is actually cardiovascular and stroke related, and the risk of cancer increases. So this is the major concern when it comes to PCOS. Increased prevalence of this disease? Well, over time, the more the amount of inflammation and fibrosis, the more the amount or risk of developing advanced cirrhosis. Like I said, the prevalence is going up over time, and patients tend to get referred to us at these stages. However, the gynecologist would interact with these patients at these stages. By the time they are cirrhotic, they already tend to have raised ALT and they might have consulted for expert opinion. So it is important for us to actually concentrate on these stages to prevent end-stage liver disease. So how do we identify and work up these patients? Well, the first thing is to look at the increased risk. And of course, PCOS and all the other risk factors discussed in the 3 case scenarios. Also, the history of a family member having NAFLD, cirrhosis, or HCC should create an idea in our mind that this is a high-risk case. We also need to ask all our patients about alcohol, because steatohepatitis could be due to alcohol and is very difficult to distinguish between the two. An honest answer is required. We also need to get the liver biochemistries done, look at the transaminases, exclude hepatitis B, C, autoimmune hepatitis, celiac disease must be ruled out. I think now celiac hepatitis needs to be looked at also. And of course, we need to rule out immunoglobulin entries, which could point to autoimmune hepatitis or advanced disease or advanced liver disease. The ferritin, alpha-1 antitrypsin, and of course the copper disease, which is Wilson's. And of course, if we look at the ultrasound, there will be increased echogenicity and a very bright light bar. Another bit of information that I need to communicate to you is regarding the time for referral. So we can do this simple score called the AST platelet ratio index, which looks at the AST level. Say your patient's level is 70, and if we do the look at the upper limit of normal, that's going to be maybe 35. So 70 by 35 gives 2 in the numerator. And if the platelet count is taken in the denominator and it is reduced, higher the inflammation, lower the platelet count, higher the APRI. So high APRI suggests advanced fibrosis, and the cutoffs are variable for viral hepatitis and for fatty liver disease. So you can use online calculators to determine the time for referral. FIB-4 uses the age, the AST, the platelet count, and the square root of the ALT. So if the FIB-4 is less than 1.3 or more than 1.3, then we can determine the low, high, or intermediate risk in more than 1.3. And then in these patients, we can go ahead with the elastography. So the FibroScan is the trade name for vibration control transient elastography, in which we use this probe, the ultrasound probe, to actually look at the liver to determine the degree of steatosis and the degree of liver stiffness as given by the controlled attenuation parameter and the liver stiffness measurement value. The use of the FibroScan actually enables us to declare how much steatosis is there. So more than 263, more than 281 and 283 are some cutoffs. Of course, the cutoffs between S2 and S3 are not well defined. So the more the amount of fibrosis, the higher is the LSM that we would expect in these patients. And this is what a high LSM reports. So steatosis here is 355 cap and LSM is 10.2, so this is almost cirrhotic. And LSM more than 20 suggests clinically significant portal hypertension, and if the platelet count is low, then these patients need a screening endoscopy to look for varices. So in PCOS women, especially if they are in the middle age, or there's diabetes, or there's a relative with NAFLD, then one must screen for NAFLD, and one has to look for risk factors like a sedentary lifestyle, Western diet, if they're having other metabolic parameters. Asians, of course, have now been added to that list as a racial risk for developing NAFLD. PCOS is high up in the list, and the presence of OSHs. So which of the PCOS women are at increased risk of steatohepatitis, that is significant ballooning inflammation? So presence of diabetes, obesity, dyslipidemia, PCOS, and if there are relatives, then there is increased risk of advanced hepatic fibrosis, and you screen for this by looking at the APRI and the FIB4, and in places where it is available, we look at the FibroScan or the RFI, which can be done with an ultrasound probe. So we are well acquainted with the risk factors associated with obesity. Liver disease and PCOS are sister disorders, and the things that actually take life would be heart disease, the risk of cancers, and uncontrolled diabetes and hypertension. And if we look at the results which occur after we achieve weight loss in these patients, whether it is done for PCOS or it is done for NAFLD, then improvement in diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and CAD is there. But NAFLD, we are not sure how much fibrosis reduction would actually occur, but definitely this is an outcome or a treatment goal. So what is the pharmacotherapy that is available for insulin resistance? All of this is off-label. We have used pioglitazone, which is a PPAR gamma agonist, which was well explained in the PIVENS trial, which showed improvement in steatosis without and the inflammation without the fibrosis worsening. And the GLP-1 receptor agonists like liraglutide, semaglutide, exenatide have been used and approved for treatment of obesity, liraglutide in the LEAN trial, and there is definite resolution of histological NASH in these cases. The pharmacotherapy that has been used for obesity itself, also there are drugs like orlistat, but the clinical effect is not well documented. This is a pancreatic and gastric lipase inhibitor and tends to reduce the absorption of lipids, and naltrexone and phentermine has been used with variable results. The recommended therapies are vitamin E given in a dose of 800 international units per day, but there is risk of stroke and there is risk of prostatic carcinoma in our male patients. So we don't give it for more than 6 months at a time, and I don't even use that 800 international units dose. Pioglitazone can be used, but there is risk of osteoporosis in PCOS women, and of course there is the issue with edema and weight gain, and some association with bladder cancer risk, but not well documented. In a PCOS women, the use of metformin, although it would be off-label, it definitely improves serum transaminases, and it can be safely prescribed by the gynecologist when they are managing patients with insulin resistance. And of course, GLP-1 receptor agonists, we are not going to give it per se for PCOS, but in patients who are diabetic and who are having insulin resistance, this is a worthy drug to consider. So the risks and benefits of all of these drugs are to be considered when prescribing, as it's all off-label. The emerging concept is that NAFLD is actually metabolic dysfunction associated fatty liver disease, not to give it the negative connotation of not being alcohol related fatty liver disease, but metabolism associated fatty liver disease. So it requires anti-steatotic effect, anti-inflammatory and anti-fibrotic effect. So combination therapy. Coming back briefly to our three cases, a young patient with PCOS may be offered metformin if there is insulin resistance. In NASH, this is a case where there is F2 fibrosis when we did the fibroscan, and AST/ALT is elevated, she is overweight, so she needs to be given pharmacotherapy possibly, other than the diet and lifestyle and weight loss. So this patient I would have given vitamin E. And in the obese patient who requires a cholecystectomy for the gallbladder polyp, well, this patient has underlying advanced fibrosis, and there is of course a high risk of having complications during surgery. So this has to be looked at in pre-surgical candidates, whether it is a gynecological surgery or otherwise. So to summarize, I have discussed three cases which have progressed in a lifetime, different stories but with the same metabolic issue, and there is a two-way talk between PCOS, the metabolism associated fatty liver disease, and the multiple comorbidities that are associated with both. We need to understand the energy metabolism in order to manage our patients correctly, and there is no one pharmacotherapy that might help, but a holistic approach with multidisciplinary action. Thank you.